Today I'm joined by Elenore Sturko. After a brief stint in media, Elenore began her career as a reservist with the Canadian Forces Air Command. She joined the RCMP in 2009 and has worked across Canada from the Lower Mainland to Yellowknife to Ottawa. Elenore continued her commitment to service in elected office, becoming the MLA for South Surrey under the BC United, formerly BC Liberals, and then for Surrey Cloverdale under the BC Conservatives. In September of 2025, she was removed from John Rusted's Conservative Party and now sits as an independent, free of any constraints. In today's episode, we're going to discuss the extortion crisis going on in Surrey, the erosion of property rights in British Columbia, and Elenore's view on the role as an independent MLA. Welcome to Coastal Front.
Thanks for having me here.
You're welcome. Glad to have you here. This topic of the extortion, some would call it an extortion crisis, is quite fascinating. It's something new that I don't think we've maybe ever faced here in British Columbia before. I'm going to start with a sort of a data point, and I'd like you to comment on it. In January, there were 35 suspected extortion cases in the city of Surrey, just over one a day. And according to Premier David Eby, Prime Minister Carney has agreed to shift more resources to address this issue. This has impacted businesses, homeowners, and most importantly, everyday citizens who are now fearing for their lives in your riding. Why is this happening?
Well, why it's happening is a pretty complex issue. This isn't something that just actually emerged. It's been happening since 2023.
Okay.
And I guess in the context of that is why I feel pretty disappointed so far in the kind of response that we've had from the provincial and federal government. It's happening for a number of reasons. But I guess in order to really dig down on that, we need the police to sort of identify who is the suspects in these. You know, we've heard in the beginning of, or at the end of last year, provincial government went to the feds and they declared the Bishnoi Gang a terrorist organization, rightly so. But so far... And
just for some reference for our listeners and viewers, what is the Bishnoi Gang?
The Lawrence Bishnoi Gang is a gang from India involved in transnational crime, all kinds of criminal enterprises, polycriminal activity. But in order for us to know whether or not all of these activities that we're experiencing in Surrey and across, mostly in the Fraser Valley, if they're actually linked to the Bishnoi Gang, we need the police to find and identify the people and then prove the link to the gang itself.
Right.
Some of these crimes are actually happening by people who are associated to local gangs, or they're people who are copycatting. So, when you say to me, why is it happening? What's the source? Well, there's multiple reasons. Could it be that there's some element of foreign interference, working to suppress elements in our community who have political differences with India? Could be in some cases. Could it be people who are already working for criminal gangs here within British Columbia? Could be. I think that we haven't had enough evidence come forward from police. Certainly, we don't have any convictions in any of these cases that we can point to at this time.
Right.
To really
Have there been arrests?
Yeah, we've had some arrests. Just in 2025, the number of extortions was over 132 extortions with 47 related shootings associated to them. In addition to those shootings, we had a 100% increase, for the year in shootings total in Surrey. And we're actually over 40 extortions with well over a dozen shootings just so far into 2026. So compared to that, though, and also I should also clarify that we're somewhere around 1,500 incidents of extortion across the country. But when you look at it in that context, I think there's less than a dozen people actually charged. They had announced in the fall that there was a couple of people deported, but they didn't clarify whether those were people who were charged with extortion or whether they were just people who already had, warrants of removal from Canada. So compared to the scale of the problem that the police are investigating right now, what we've seen in terms of arrests and people associated to, action by the Canada Border Service Agency, I'd say it's relatively small.
As a former police officer and understanding how the law enforcement industry or sector works, do you believe, I think in Surrey you guys have two police forces, do you not? Do you have
Well, we have one police of jurisdiction. It's the Surrey Police Service. But
Okay.
yeah, we went through a transition. That was a
from
pretty big.
RCMP to
Right.
Right.
I was part of the Surrey RCMP myself.
Yeah.
And then the transition now, our police of jurisdiction is the Surrey Police Service, and there is the Surrey Police Operational Support Unit, who are sort of backing up the Surrey Police right
Right.
now.
Do
But
they have the resources to deal with this?
yeah, it depends what we mean by resources as well. Do they have police officers on the ground? Of
Yeah.
course. And we hear different things at different times. At one point in time, we had our police chief and we had the provincial leader for the task force handling extortion saying they had enough. And then, you'll have another press conference and they're asking for more. But I think one of the critical things that might be impacting in terms of the transition, what we see with policing in Surrey is that, this was a policing transition approved by the NDP without a fulsome and modern human resources plan that, and as a result, we have a destabilization of policing in Metro Vancouver. There's a competitive environment among police forces for recruiting, retention. There wasn't any realistic training plan. And why that matters the most, when you say HR plan, people zone out.
Yeah.
That's not that exciting. But we're not just talking about people and boots on the ground. We're actually talking about a retention of skills and expertise and knowledge about the community.
Right.
If you're a police officer who works, in investigating serious crimes or in a gang unit or in a drug unit, you might have developed sources in a community, who can provide
I see.
intelligence. Those are non-transferable
Right.
entities. You can't just transfer someone your
Sure.
source. People's lives would be at risk, And so when you think about the way policing in a city just changes by nature of that expertise, those relationships leaving a community, it has an impact.
Right.
So this is one of the challenges that our new local police force that is a source of pride for the community, but also we need to be concerned. This is why when I ask the premier to step up with resources and helping, it's not just a matter of boots, it's a matter of who is in those boots and what skills they're bringing to the table.
Right. Well said. Well, speaking of boots, that is an element of it, though. And the federal government says that they are going to send 20 additional officers in a police helicopter.
Well, we already have
almost-
this helicopter thing drives me nuts,
Okay.
because it's a distraction.
Yeah.
Okay, we have airline.
Reading that headline, it seems to me it's almost like saying, well, there's a forest fire happening, bring a bucket.
A little bit, and you have to kind of understand how are helicopters used in policing.
Right.
Are they hovering around the city with their head out the window listening for gunshots?
Right.
No, they're not going to do that. Obviously, they need to be intelligence led.
Yeah.
And they helicopters are often used when there's a high risk arrest going to take place, or they're worried someone might flee from a property, or they have
Sure.
information that there's something they're looking for.
Yeah.
But
It certainly doesn't help in intelligence or prevention.
you're not going to just hover around a city. You're going to need to use this in a very specific way. But I think, honestly, that was also a response from different political candidates in municipal asking for helicopters. But,
Right.
look, whatever the government wants to provide, certainly we need more resources here.
Yeah.
But I think the bigger issue that is getting missed, and this is where the federal government is really falling down here, is that police are just one part of this equation. We also have immigration laws that there's Bill C-12 is waiting to be passed in Parliament in Ottawa. We also have the limitations of our criminal code, a lack of investment in the type of technologies that police need to investigate these types of crimes that have a lot of digital evidence in them. And so, we need to have a commissioner, or a czar or whatever. We had the federal government appointed a fentanyl czar.
Yeah.
And they did it, mind you, while they were still saying that this was all hooey baloney about fentanyl coming across the border, and they were, getting pressure from the U.S. president. So, if they were saying it was not real, this fentanyl crossing the border, and
Why would
it
they?
had a czar,
Yeah.
we have real shootings happening every day. People in my community in the crosshairs of people committing terror acts in our community. Why not have this federal czar who can actually make sure that the resources are coordinated, that the laws, even the new ones they're about to receive royal assent, that they're actually up to the task. Remove any kind of barriers and be accountable to Canadians. This isn't
Sure.
actually a Surrey problem.
Yeah.
It's a Canadian problem that's taking place in multiple cities and provinces in Canada.
Hmm.
It just so happens that one of the places that it's happening and is terrible is my hometown.
Yeah.
And so, I want to do everything that I can as MLA to make sure that we're putting that pressure where it needs to go on leadership. Because I really don't, at the end of the day, I think that whether you're an SPS member or an RCMP member right now on the street, the frontline police are working really hard.
Yeah, I'm sure they
They
are.
want to get bad guys, trust
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
When you're out on the street, there's nothing better than finding someone who the evidence points to, this is the person who's been hurting somebody else or the
Yeah.
community, and you're bringing them to court. You're going to bring them to justice. And so I know that they are hungry for that.
Yeah.
But, it's leadership, and it's right at the top, right from the PM, right from the, premier. We got to make sure that for the men and women on the front line, whether it's the CBSA front line or whether it's RCMP, whether it's SPS, that they actually have what they need in their hands to be able to get these people
Mhm.
and to deal with them effectively. We need to remember that an arrest isn't the end. It's just one part of a long process. We need convictions,
Yeah.
and if appropriate, we need deportations.
Right. Right. Well said. Elenore, as an MLA, you're talking about policies that are really federal related, such as immigration, and also policies that are municipal related, such as policing. And you're kind of like between those two. How do you see your role there?
Yeah, I do see myself between those two worlds, but more so as a bridge, I think. And I see it between a bridge between the victims of crime in my community and those government services, whether it's police or immigration or whether it's, any level of government, municipal, up to the feds.
Yeah.
And I have an opportunity to listen. And, if you send an email as a private citizen, it still gets attention. But when you send, an email or a correspondence, or you're able to pick up the phone to a minister
Hmm.
and, convey to them what's happening in your community, it can have an impact. And so I've actually been very privileged to be able to pick up the phone. I've had conversations with the Solicitor General. I've been able to, at least have the voices of the people that I serve recognized in the crisis. And then, of course, as a critic, when you're not in government, you're the critic. Being able to, I hope, critique in a way that also helps point the direction to some solutions. And I really do think that more federal leadership is needed in British Columbia right now to take on something that's not just a local issue. This is a bigger issue.
Right. Right. For the listeners and viewers of Coastal Front who might not really understand this at a more granular level, because we hear the term extortion, and I actually think it's not a great word to use because it doesn't sound as bad as as probably it is. I mean, these people are being threatened with their lives. There's actually shots being fired. I mean, I don't know if there's been anybody who's died at this point, but
No, but people have been injured. There was a
right.
woman shot in her bed.
Right.
And
Can you maybe tell a story or two of like at a more granular level? Like how does this extortion even happen? Like what are we talking about here? Like what's going on?
Yeah, it's extremely serious. And I think this is one aspect that maybe I do agree with the Premier on. These are terror attacks. They're meant to terrorize and scare people.
Right.
They want people to pay.
Right.
They will do whatever it takes to get money. So a person will receive a correspondence. People have reported to me that they've gotten like WhatsApp messages and basically being told to pay a sum of money or be killed.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. It's very serious.
That's how it starts? Like it's just a straight up text or WhatsApp message?
Yeah, or a phone call. People directly phone, and they receive a message telling them to pay X amount of dollars or be killed. And which obviously, I mean, it's terrifying, particularly terrifying when that threat is followed up by gunfire, by someone shooting your house.
I mean, that's as real as it
Their
gets.
motivation is money. Their motivation is to make you pay.
Yeah.
So, yes, people have been injured. There was one woman who was in her bed and was shot. I'm not sure that even her house was the intended target, but she was shot in her bed. And then actually not far from where I live, a gardener received a ricochet bullet in his face. And so he was also injured by gunfire. But like beyond the physical injury, yeah, people are injured every day from this, psychologically,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally.
Sure.
They're receiving sometimes messages, which, this is, it's unbelievable, but, oh, can you leave town? Maybe you should go on holidays. You know, so you don't even feel safe in your home.
Right.
And the amount of, I can't imagine the trauma that these families are going through. And I think that's been understated in the media. You
Yeah.
often see the
Well, that's why I'm asking this
bullet
question.
holes, but
Yeah.
the level of trauma that the families and business owners are feeling. And even we had someone allegedly fire back in Surrey, which is extremely serious. And I get it. Like, I'm not actually in favor of people arming themselves. And, you're doubling the danger when you have bullets flying both ways, obviously, and increasing the chance of someone in your home being injured by your own gun when you have a loaded firearm,
Yeah.
accessible like that. But I know why people feel that way.
Yeah.
And I think that when you imagine yourself in that scenario where you believe you're in a life and death situation, you're not worried about getting in trouble for your gun.
Mm-hmm.
You're worried about saving your own life.
Yeah.
And the fact that people have felt that they had to take that step is because they've lost confidence in the
Yeah, that
police.
says something.
It really does, which is like really also for me emotional, because like having been a police officer, your whole reason for existing in that role is because you want to make people feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
You want to help your community. And
I mean, it's like not going to the hospital because the healthcare system's failed you, and you're like, well, I might as well just do these stitches myself and hope I don't get any infection.
It's devastating personally to know that there's people living in my community that don't feel that there is anyone that can protect them.
Yeah. In Canada.
In Canada.
I mean,
we have people
incredible.
who've come to Canada as refugees to escape constant danger.
Right.
And now we have people living in Canada that feel they're in constant danger.
Yeah.
It just can't be like this, which is, I guess, why, at times maybe I've been a harsh critic of how it's been handled. But look, since 2023, this was an emerging issue.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate, some of the things that the Premier of BC's done. And I can appreciate that Prime Minister Carney is committed 20
What are some of those
CPD
things? What are some of the things that you think?
Well, the task force is a good idea,
right?
Obviously, I'm not sure that we have the right kind of cooperation amongst agencies at this time, but that's a good move.
Yeah. That was done by Premier Eby?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything that Prime Minister Carney has done that's at least positive towards
it's sending
addressing
us 20 more people, and yes, 20 isn't the number I would have liked to see.
This just sounds like such a small number.
But we're talking about people likely from serious crimes, people with the right kind of skills and expertise. I think we had talked about that. It's not just about the boots.
Yeah.
It's about who is filling those boots. And there are certain types of skills and expertise that are important in investigations that are complex like this, people that can write judicial authorizations and people who have a major case management skills, all these things. Because like I said, the arrest is just like one piece. First of all, you got to find out who.
Yeah.
Then the why, what, what are they doing this for? Who else do they work with? Is there any other associations?
Well, if there haven't,
the evidence.
Elenore, if there hasn't been that many arrests, then if there hasn't been that many arrests, then the intelligence community and law enforcement probably can't put together much of a strategy if they don't know who they're even looking out for. But I would think that they could also glean some intel from who the targets are. And I'm curious, you mentioned this one woman who's been shot in her bed, but is there a trend? Certainly we're going to know who the victims are, because I would assume they all get reported.
and I don't know. There's been things I've been curious about. Why are so many of them associated to car businesses or insurance agencies? I don't know. I don't have investigative information. So I'm just like any other member of the public wondering. And surely the police are doing an intelligence-led investigation, which is why, like I said, the 20 people.
So you don't know. You don't know if there's what type of people are being targeted?
I'm going to say is I don't have any direct knowledge of any of the investigations, and it would be inappropriate for me to.
Right.
I have my hunches, having been an investigator before. I think about what I would do if I was investigating, but no, I don't have any I don't have any influence over any of the investigations. My role now as MLA is just to help my constituents navigate the process at times, and I make suggestions based on gaps that I see. For example,
Yeah.
saying why not have a national commissioner to help coordinate the effort?
Let me make a controversial, potentially controversial statement slash question. Your riding that you're in is predominantly South Asian community. Surrey's well known for that. It seems to me that most of these extortionists and the victims are of the South Asian community. I also find it compelling that over the past 3 or 4 years, 5 years, it's not now, but you mentioned 2023, we had a massive influx of so-called students. Most of these students are from India. And this is not at all to suggest that like a young male coming from India to better his life here in Canada and become as a student and going to a legitimate school turns into a criminal. But I just find it quite interesting, the data. I mean, you've got this massive increase of immigrants. Large number of them are young male men from India coming to the South Asian community, likely going to go to Surrey, because I mean, if I was South Asian and my English...
Everybody should move to Surrey no matter what. It's the best city in British Columbia. What do you...
It's a beautiful city. I've
telling
been
you,
out there
it is.
lots.
It's the best. I
And
love it.
actually, I love
Very
this.
proud to be from Surrey. So.
Yeah, for sure. And there's nothing wrong with having a strong South Asian community in the same way that Richmond has a strong Asian community. You know, West Vancouver has a strong Iranian community. I mean, that's what happens. They used to call it Little Italy on Commercial Drive, right? There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's beautiful because there's some great places. I go to sweet shops out in Surrey. It's great. But I'm just tying these two together, these two data points. It's really very subjective. And I'm just looking at going to this and going, well, you've got this mass increase of immigrants that have come in, namely from India. And now this community of South Asians have been targets of extortion. And it makes you kind of wonder, like, what's going on here?
Well, I think there's some important things to consider.
Yeah.
This is food for thought.
Yeah.
I'm not going to disagree that I think that we have challenges with our immigration system. Particularly frustrating for people is being that some of the people who've been arrested and subsequently charged have now claimed asylum in Canada, taking advantage of a loophole that will be closed after Bill C-12 comes into effect. But so... it seems like, so hearing, even when I said, we have 1,500 plus extortions in Canada over the last 3 years. But does that mean we have 1,500 different extortionists, or do we have small groups of people responsible for large numbers of these terror
Right.
attacks? Okay, so put that into perspective of
Sure.
the millions of
Well
people who
said.
come to Canada.
It's like the auto thefts.
Right.
Right.
Remember,
I mean, it's kind of like...
you can have 2 or 3 people steal like 300 catalytic converters, right? And that's
exactly.
usually how it works too.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to at all minimize the challenges with immigration. We definitely need to also stop relying on voluntary compliance for people who overstay their welcome, whether it's a work visa or work, permit for school. But I also want to put it in perspective for the community that, first of all, I know of Caucasian people who are targets of extortion
Okay.
in this crisis. I would say that they're fewer compared to the people I know who are of the South Asian descent. But I think that even given the large number of extortions in Surrey, where we had last year 132 with 47 shootings, many of those targeted the same victim. I think only 75 unique victims, which likely means that several of them were committed by the same person or group of people. So in that context, you have to look at the fact that large number of crimes may be attributable to a small number of people. Some of them may have external, like gang affiliations. Some of them could be people who had no criminal affiliation before coming to British Columbia and fell in with criminal organizations pre-existing within our province or local gangs. And so before we jump to conclusions that it is all tied to mass immigration,
Right.
which would be, I think we need to let the evidence come out. We haven't had any convictions yet. So let's let the court process play out, which is also why I think it's really important too.
But don't you find that data kind of convenient?
Well, I think it's
I mean,
concerning when we see foreign nationals. Like last week, 5 foreign nationals were arrested in my community with association to firearms being in the vehicle they were charged, and there was extortion shots fired in the area. So they're accused of those crimes. Do I find that disturbing and concerning? Absolutely. Do I think that foreign nationals who are involved in crime in our country should be deported? Absolutely, I think that. But before we go towards, and I think one of the things that I feel also passionately about, because I'm from one of the most diverse and multicultural cities in this beautiful province, is that I want to make sure that we don't other people, that we don't attribute all of our problems to one particular group.
Mhm.
We need to attribute crime to criminals, whoever they are.
Right.
And if they are foreign nationals, we need to get them out, send them back to where they came from, prevent them from coming here ever again, or let them go through the court process, incarcerate them, do their time, then give them the boot. But I want to be cautious in characterizing members of our community who truly have come here as students, acting in good faith, working
Sure.
hard on their
Well, that's why I
studies.
framed the question in the first
Yeah.
place, not to suggest that every
Exactly.
young
But
man
I think
coming
it's
from
worth
India
saying.
is a
I think it's worth saying because, a lot of the media coverage has, focused a lot on the immigration aspect, which is important. But we actually have, apart from these 5 arrests that we recently had, and I think there was only like a handful of arrests before that last year related to crimes that took place a year earlier even, we need to let this entire investigation and the evidence that the police are going to get. I was uncomfortable in the beginning, actually, when Premier Eby was talking about even the Lawrence Bishnoi gang, because I was like, I don't remember the police ever saying this is all the Lawrence Bishnoi gang. I don't remember the police ever saying who these, even these last 5 arrests, are these people gang affiliates?
right.
Or are they just thugs that came here? It's harder to be a student in Canada. It's hard to be a student born in Canada, let alone coming from a foreign country.
Right.
Are these people who are taking advantage now of a scenario that pays? And I think
So
that
you're suggesting we kind of just have to be patient and wait this out?
I think that we have to look at the evidence that we have. We already have evidence that our immigration system needs a fix. And
Yeah.
there is legislation in the works. And we have to be very quick to evaluate whether it's working, C-12, once it receives royal assent. But I think that generalizing and if there's one problem with our immigration system that I think still isn't receiving the attention it should, is the fact that we continue to rely on this voluntary compliance. Your visa runs out and we're just trusting that you're going to show up instead of disappearing like the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that have already done that.
Right.
And so,
Well, this is where I think in Canada we are quite foolish and naive. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on how we fix this, because I've said this to my wife recently, because we have people who work for me who are on work visas. And obviously these are certainly law-abiding, highly educated young people that we're trying to hopefully renew them and get them PR status, because they're such great additions to our society. And they come from everywhere, not just from, Asia. But there are certainly many people who their work visa has run out. Do you think they're getting them back on an aircraft? I mean, if I'm from a developing country, whether I'm from India, China, Brazil, South Africa, anywhere from most countries in Africa, Eastern Europe, right? And my work visa has run out. Like, do you think I'm going to get on a plane and go back to my country where my life is way worse and probably more risky? I mean, of course not. And so what ends up happening is, I would assume, they go underground, right? They work in the underground economy. Maybe I'm making too much of a...
no, I think you're right. Look,
yeah.
I think that we definitely need to... we're so polite and friendly as Canadians, and we assume the best in people.
Yeah.
And
I mean, listen to me even ask these questions. I'm
I
framing
know.
it all because I'm worried that someone's going to take
We
a
don't
clip of
wanna
this
be
and
rude.
go,
Yeah.
the guy's a
But
racist,
it's time
right?
for
And
us to be
he sounds like Trump.
It's time for us to be real and identify the real problems with our immigration system. And
Yeah.
I think, you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, why wouldn't you want to stay in Canada? This is
Sure.
one of the greatest countries on earth with,
Yeah.
such a great population of people that, and a great system that we have overall.
I mean, there's proof right there that you're Canadian. See, because if you were American, you would say this is the best country in the entire world. And you, as a Canadian, you said this is one of the best countries in the world.
Yeah, right. I don't want to offend anyone. But, so I think that we have some work to do. When I was in the RCMP, I actually came across an individual who had a warrant of removal, and I ended up taking them to a detention center. And I don't know what happened to them. I assume they were removed from Canada after that. But so clearly there was a person that was supposed to at some point leave, and they didn't. And so, but if we don't invest that money, like these are all things that cost money. The RCMP can go and find people with warrants and bring them to the appropriate centers. We have a Canada Border Service agency can help investigate whether people are compliant with their immigration status and conduct investigations. But if we don't fund those units, if we don't provide, funding for those positions, that work's not going to get done. And now we have underfunded these things to the extent in Canada that we are in a crisis now. And I guess what I meant before by wanting to make sure that people understand that even if we had 132 extortions, it doesn't necessarily mean there was 132 extortionists in Surrey. And I think that knowing that the vast majority of people who come to my community are really, really just law-abiding citizens, as you say, who have seen what a great country this is and are doing everything they can to be a part of this great nation, this great province, that I want to make sure when they're walking down the street, that they're not faced with the racism that can come when we other people. But we definitely need to find the bad guys. We need to give the police the tools to find out who these jerks are and get them out or send them to jail and throw away the key.
Elenore, before we move on to our next topic, I do want to ask you about the fact that we have 15 people who are now charged for extortion activity and are now claiming refugee status. It seems like a really easy out for these people. What's your take on the whole refugee status and how it's maybe being abused here in Canada? Yeah,
it's a loophole. I think, so claiming refugee status doesn't, if you are charged with the crime and there is enough evidence for, prosecution, it doesn't stop your prosecution. This is people who want to be able to extend their stay and not to be deported. Look, I think that we definitely need to have a reevaluation. That C-12 is actually going to close that loophole by, if you are arrested for a crime or involved in criminal activity, you can't get an immigration and refugee board hearing. You get deported. And I think that most Canadians would agree that, that's a deal
totally
breaker.
Reasonable.
It's a deal breaker for us. And firing a gun into the community is a deal breaker for us. There's many serious offenses that are absolute deal breakers for Canadians. But look, Canada has been a home for people escaping the violence and injustice in the world, and we need to continue to be that. But we have to make sure that those who would abuse our system, who would, use it to shelter criminal activity, that we put a stop to that. So, I think it's going to be very interesting. One of the things that's important in making new laws, so even after the new immigration changes come into effect, we need to make sure it works. And if it doesn't work, they need to act quickly to make the amendments needed to make it work. But we have to be more careful too. I mean, we have to ensure that people who are coming here are truly coming because they're refugees. And one of the things is if you're coming from a country that's terrible and you're in danger and you can't go back, maybe you shouldn't go back for a holiday. We need to kind of monitor, if it's truly terrible going back for summer vacation, is that true refugee status? And maybe I don't know, there's
as far as I understand, the layman's term of a refugee is someone who can't go back to the country they're from for risk of being in danger of their life.
Or persecution. And
persecution
exactly.
or whatever.
And who, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe
if you're a refugee from, country ABC.
I think we need to
and then you go back there for
stringent.
summer vacation.
And we need to make sure that, Canada remains a place of refuge, but that we're not allowing people to take advantage of our generosity as Canadians.
Yeah. I can imagine the emotional toll is far greater than the physical toll. And
100%. This is a psychological.
Yeah. I can't imagine what it'd be like to go to bed at night knowing that someone's claiming that they might come and literally kill you or your family for some money. I mean, to have that happening in Canada is incredible.
That's why people are paying.
Right.
They're paying because they are afraid that if they don't, that
Yeah.
they'll be killed.
Right.
And the fact that, one of the most disappointing and frustrating parts is that we have people who call the police because they've received a threat. Subsequent to that, their house is shot and then is shot again. We should be able to have a threat and then not have people's houses shot multiple times.
Yeah.
This is why people take the law into their own hands.
Sure.
This is why they pay.
Yeah.
It would be absolutely terrifying. There's no doubt. I can totally get into the people's headspace as to, why they might pay, why they might feel that they have to arm themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We need to fix it so that they don't feel that way.
Yeah. Well said. We're going to go on to our next topic, also a very contentious issue, which is around BC property rights. The Cowichan Tribe's decision continues to have effects regarding private property in BC. Premier Eby has pledged to scale back the power courts have in shaping reconciliation. I'm going to start off with this first question about UNDRIP or UNDRIPA. Should David Eby repeal UNDRIPA?
Yeah, so the UNDRIP is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, passed by the United Nations, adopted eventually by Canada. British Columbia is the only province that has legislation to bring DRIPA into law. DRIPA stands for the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act.
I said UNDRIPA, didn't I?
But that's okay, because a lot of British Columbians don't know the difference. So UNDRIP is what, the United Nations Declaration. DRIPA, which is what, politicians are asking to have repealed, is the piece of legislation that brings DRIPA into legislation, UNDRIP into legislation in British Columbia.
Right.
And what
DRIPA was passed unanimously by all MLAs.
in 2020, 2019, possibly?
Before your
I'm
time.
sorry. Yeah, it was before I was elected, and I should know this. We're about to debate it, but several years ago now. I think at the time, even British Columbians saw this as sort of an aspirational document about, working closely with Indigenous nations and really setting the tone for of the relationship. What it does, though, is it stipulates consent and joint decision-making and the alignment of British Columbia's laws with the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. But there's another separate piece of legislation that actually is what makes that alignment of our laws happen, and that's called the Interpretation Act. The Interpretation Act is the legislation that if a judge has to make a decision and interpret one of our laws, our acts, like the Land Titles Act or the Mineral Tenure Act, that they must interpret that in a way that doesn't derogate from the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And so in two separate cases this last year, notably being the Cowichan decision, judges refer to the Interpretation Act as where they receive this instruction to look at our BC laws this way through the lens of DRIPA. And it had an impact. So to be clear for your viewers and listeners, there's lots of constitutional law surrounding, obviously Section 35 and all the jurisprudence, all the court decisions that, since 1982 to today that really govern Indigenous title and rights. So we didn't really need to have DRIPA, but now having had DRIPA become legislation here and the Interpretation Act guiding judges' decisions, because it says you must do this. It's not, hey, if you think of it, or you must do this. It really has sort of, in my opinion, tipped the scales away from the balance of public interest.
Mm-hmm.
And it has really changed fundamentally the way decisions are being made in court, these court decisions. And so when David Eby says he wants to change the way that judges' powers to, advance reconciliation, he's actually talking about the Interpretation Act of British Columbia. And in November of 2025, I actually entered a private member's bill to repeal that section of the Interpretation Act, Section 8.1, that that makes that happen. So we'll see if they debate that, going
Good for
forward.
you.
But it's an important thing. There's other questions.
So what you're suggesting in layman's terms is we don't need to repeal DRIPA, as some MLAs have been calling for, and others out in the community. What we need to do is not even repeal the Interpretation Act, but modify it.
Well, look, the Interpretation Act can't be repealed because we still need to. It existed before, and it's how we instruct judges to interpret our legislation if there's a court decision, or statutory decision makers to make decisions based on our provincial legislation. We, having that repeal of the Section 8.1 of the Interpretation Act would definitely make a difference, and it would change, and you wouldn't necessarily have to repeal DRIPA. But I think this is the part of DRIPA that has people asking questions, which is the joint and consent decision making. Because, it does put decision-making power into, governing bodies that are unaccountable to the electorate. And in Section 3 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, you and I both have the right to elect those who make decisions for us. We elect our government.
Right.
That's our charter right.
Yeah.
And so
We don't elect our judges.
well, we elect those like me,
Yeah,
right?
to select who they are.
To select who they are, so that
Yeah.
when I make a decision, if I vote for something and you don't like it, give me the boot, right?
Right,
I'm going
yeah.
to get not elected.
Yeah.
Or they can start a campaign to get rid of me. And that's how our democratic process works. So is it democratic then for David Eby and the NDP to hand over decision-making powers to people who I can't vote for, and I can't fire, and I can't recall?
You're talking about the judges.
No, I'm talking about Indigenous nations.
Okay.
Okay? But even, a judge it's not the judge's fault. They didn't do anything wrong.
Okay.
They did everything actually legally. They followed
They
the law of
they did what
British
they were
Columbia.
told to do.
They did what the law stipulates they must do. And the word must is actually a very important word in the legislation because it's not an option.
Right.
If you tell a statutory decision maker, like a judge, that they must do something, it's the law.
Yeah.
They will
must
do it.
Yeah.
So when David Eby's like, oh, the judges, they've done what I didn't want them to do, he's lying. Okay, I'm going to be as bold as to say he lied to you, because the Interpretation Act Amendment, Bill 29, he made this. This was his personal bill. Okay, and so the fact that they drafted it with the word "you must do this," must.
When did the Interpretation Act come into?
2021, I think November. Yeah.
It was right in the heart of COVID.
Yes.
Do you think that Premier Eby anticipated that this would be coming? Like that his legislation he passed was going to cause this kind of disruption amongst our, investing community, individuals, people living in Richmond who are like, I can't even get my mortgage to renew because the banks won't renew it?
I'm going to say yes and no.
Okay.
I'm going to say I think that they wanted this to go this way. They wanted to unbalance the scales in this way. They wanted to have these policies with respect to the way that land title and co-governing. This is their philosophy, this whole co-governing and
Right.
joint decision-making. Not everybody agrees with that. Like, I personally think that it's not, it goes against the charter is my, I want to be able to elect the people that make the decisions on my behalf.
Right.
But do I think that he thought that it would blow up like this? Probably not, because look at everything else he's done. Safe supply and
Right.
decriminal. These things blew up.
Yeah.
Okay, like they didn't go well.
Isn't this
so
pushing us away from reconciliation?
unfortunately, I think
I mean-
yes, but it's like when we were talking about extortion,
Yeah.
and we had a conversation, and I thought it was important to remind people it's a very small population of bad people,
Yeah.
right? Causing a big problem. And in this case, I think people are blaming the First Nation and getting mad, and unfairly on the nations. They have the right, and it's constitutionally enshrined, to make these claims
Right.
over their traditional territories and do stuff. And I want to point out to British Columbians as well, because I see a lot of social media posts and stuff. And when people are like, every square inch of British Columbia is being claimed as First Nations, Have a look at the treaty map of Alberta. Have you seen it? Every inch of Alberta is covered by treaty. But the difference is that we don't have our province covered by treaties. Treaties are constitutionally protected. So once that treaty is made, it is enshrined by our constitution.
So that's the big
Agreements
difference
are
between
not, right?
So the big difference between Alberta and BC in this scenario is Alberta's entire province has been
Settled by treaties.
settled by treaty.
And that is gives
And
you
not here in
certainty.
BC.
No, not here in BC. There are some treaty areas, and there's actually 3 treaties, I believe, that are waiting to be signed and agreed to and be complete. And that's actually a good thing
Yeah.
because they
So how are
have
things
certainty.
settled here in BC?
Well, we
They
just have a
haven't.
different history. So yeah, we're not settled. We're in the period of time of settling. And so I guess we do need to have treaties. We need to negotiate. We need to have certainty in a treaty. Title is handled by willing seller, willing buyer. And so there's a certainty there. This government has been very keen on entering into agreements. Agreements are not treaties. They are not protected constitutionally. They can later be argued against in court. There was an agreement that was made by the Christy Clark government with the Chilcotin. And one of the parts of the agreement was that the Chilcotin wouldn't file any claims against private property. But then within 6 months of the agreement, they entered into court a claim against private property. And, that's their right to do so.
Right.
It makes it very awkward, I think, but I want to make sure, I think the government really needs to be aware, and I think they're alive to it, obviously now. Again, it blew up in their face, but we just need certainty. I mean, I got a mortgage, right, on my townhouse, but, a lot of British Columbians are in the same boat. I'm just a middle-class mom who's hoping that my private property isn't going to be worthless or that
Right.
default my mortgage or something bad will happen.
Yeah.
A lot of us have...
Well, never mind the fact that on a much bigger scale, Elenore, like this is totally going to drive any interest for foreign companies to want to invest here.
Well, of course.
Like, why would I invest? I mean, would you invest? I mean, if you were an executive for a major corporation looking to build a new data center or a distribution, center, would you invest in BC today?
Money goes where it grows. And, you know that. You're the money guy.
Yeah,
People
yeah.
will put
Well,
their
Chip
money...
Wilson was one of my favorite guests on the show, and his line was, "Money goes where it's most loved."
Yeah, right? Well, look, I think that investors want to put their money where it's going to be certain, especially in times that are... I mean, think of yourself if you even have a small portfolio and you get asked to do the little test about what your risk tolerance is.
Sure.
And for those people, when times are tough or you don't have a lot of money, your risk tolerance...
Yeah.
very low, right? Yeah. No, I only need to have RSPs or whatever that are going to be real solid.
Yeah.
And so people aren't willing to take a risk, particularly right now where our world economy is not exactly at its most stable and robust.
Yeah.
They're not going to want to take a big risk. So if you are looking at a place like Alberta, where the treaties are settled, they're constitutionally protected, there is certainty there for business and the agreement of land use between government and nations, that is good for investment. And for British Columbia, we don't have that certainty. And in fact, now with these disputes and these 2 cases, particularly the Mineral Tenure Act, will be very impactful on business. We need to get into the ledge. We need to debate whatever changes the premier's going to make, whether he's actually changing the DRIPA legislation or whether he's changing the Interpretation Act of British Columbia. We need this to be solved, but we, more importantly, and I think on an even deeper, like this DRIPA thing is like a pretty sexy thing that's on everybody's social media and we're all, talking about it. But I think on a deeper level of how do we get through this? How do we move forward? What's the solution? Is that we actually have to have our governments, provincially and the federal government, actually negotiating with First Nations and having treaties and actually solving the issues once and for all to give certainty to First Nations because they deserve it too.
Right.
and everybody else.
Yeah.
And you know what? It will
So
put us on
that's
equal
the
footing.
long-term
Yeah,
solution.
and everyone wants to, we should all be equal and everyone deserves. Yeah, well, this puts us more on an equal footing. And everybody in the scenario then has the certainty that they deserve. We create that stable environment for business investment. I mean, particularly when the road is rocky, we need to have that really, really solid mechanism for traveling forward.
Yeah.
And I think really getting down to business and getting things settled and solved, making deals but constitutionally enshrined deals is what's really important.
Okay. So that's a great long-term solution, but there's like short-term issues occurring right now, both in the investment community, but also, as you mentioned, middle-class Vancouverites and people living, Fraser Valley, Lower Mainland, BC, who are worried about, does the house they own, the land they own, really their land? Do you feel that David Eby is acting quickly enough to address this?
Well, yes and no. I mean, as a homeowner, nothing can go fast enough, and for the people in Richmond, they must be losing their minds. Obviously,
Yeah.
this is very stressful for them. We have Montrose Properties, a business that's now applied to have the case reopened so that it can be heard. There's a lot of complexities here that obviously, if this could be solved overnight and we could just dedicate all of our court time to this, but at the same time, I want to see those parties involved, the government, the Attorney General, the lawyers for the government. I want to see them taking enough time to make good arguments in court. And in the meantime, David Eby needs to get into the legislature. I hope they're going to bring forward some solutions here. Because we have to debate this. We have to whether it's the Interpretation Act or DRPA, we need to get a little bit more certainty. Interim certainty, I guess, is what you're talking about. Yes, the truth was for the long term, but what do we do right now?
Yeah.
Well, we are going to need legislatively to come up with something. I mean, there are constitutional mechanisms. I think it's Section 43 of the Constitution allows for a province to have an individual province to have a right enshrined within the Constitution. Could they look at ways of enshrining private property rights, for example? I don't know if that's the solution. We'll still have then unanswered questions of our relationship with First Nations and how we settle land title claims. But something's going to happen in terms of, David Eby said he's bringing something forward. It's like Christmas Eve for politicians because we get to unwrap that in just a couple weeks. And I'm looking forward to it because I've been meeting with different groups, not only from the homeowners' perspective, but also from the First Nation perspective as well. And I've asked each group, how do we fix it? I'm a layperson. I'm not a Indigenous lawyer. I mean, I've probably said things not all correct. I'll get a bunch of emails from lawyers saying oh, you're totally wrong, whatever. But, I do my best to understand what's going on. I consult with groups on all sides of this equation, and I'm looking to have a debate where I can hopefully look at what the government's presenting. And look, I'm not going to be obstructive as an MLA. I have a vote just like every other member, and I think
and you have a independent vote.
I have an independent vote, and I think
in a minute.
Sometimes, when you see party politics, you'll see people just voting out of, we're voting against it out of principle. We said nothing short of a repeal is going to do this. Okay. Well, when the government has at least one seat advantage, the legislation will likely pass.
Yeah.
And so is it in the best interest of my constituents for me to be obstructive or to actually try and work as hard as I can to make sure that whatever legislation we're passing in the near term, it's going to protect their private property rights.
Right.
And that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. I would like to see more politicians at all levels act that way, vote what's right for British Columbians, Canadians, Vancouverites. I happen to be a resident of Vancouver, not voting because they're going against what the governing party's trying to do. Before we get into being an independent MLA, if you were David Eby's political advisor, what's that conversation look like right now? Is unwinding DRPA, modifying the Interpretation Act that you yourself brought in, it's got to bear some kind of political risk or blowback, because now you've got the BC Conservatives going, see, you're taking your own legislation that you wrote, just like the safe supply, and once again, admitting to the world
So you're
that
going to
you
get that anyway. You know
Right.
what? You get it anyway as a.
So you don't think there's much risk for David Evie to?
I think there's the greater risk is not acting.
Uh-huh.
But it's a balancing act,
Yeah.
because we're talking about entire populations of people, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, who these pieces of legislation we're about to debate, this impacts people's lives so intimately and their future so intimately. And, we're talking about potential for generational change for First Nations who've been disadvantaged over time. And, he has a lot on his plate to balance there. And, uh, I think that he will have to really focus on what is the best solution instead of worrying about that political fallout. The
Right.
reality is that unless the something happens to someone in the government or they vote against themselves, the government is not falling tomorrow.
Right.
So we have 3 more years potentially till the next election, but we have these real problems right now with private property questions and uncertainty in the economy. This is a government that just has been talking to the media about the bloodbath that will be the slashed budget that we're about to get, a death by 1,000 cuts budget. He needs certainty in the economy, and he has to weigh the balance of the public interest in protecting private property rights, which we all want. He has a responsibility as a representative of the Crown to negotiate and to work with First Nations and to advance reconciliation. And he needs money. This province needs cash. And we need to have investment and to attract capital. And we need to create stability. And so he's going to have to not worry about whether the Conservatives call him names or point a finger and
Right.
get this job done. And that's what I'm going to be looking for, is real changes in this legislation.
Yeah. Well said. So you're an independent MLA.
That's my superpower now.
That's your superpower. You were unceremoniously removed from the BC Conservative Caucus by John Rusted for your opinions, even though John Rusted had said he'd tolerate all points of view in his party. And he actually said that here on Coastal Front in front of me. You seem to have made the best of this unfortunate situation. What are the pros of now being an independent, and what are the cons?
Yeah. Well, and you're right. That was a big shift to go from being in a party to being an independent. And it's taken some adjustment. And over the last couple months, I've been independent, I guess, since the end of September. You know what? I feel like I've grown into this position. It's not easy to stand on your own. But I feel confident being able to stand for the things that I think are right for the community. And there's a real sense of freedom, not having to have a whipped vote, not having to, go to any political persuasion. I don't have to go one way or the other. I only have to look directly at a problem and how do we solve it? And there's a real freedom to that. And I actually am quite enjoying. The downsides, obviously, is it's very difficult to be elected as an independent.
Yeah,
I mean, Vicky Huntington, everyone always brings her up, right?
Yeah.
She has a very...
Wasn't she an MLA in Delta area?
Yeah, and she had an issue that was really important. I think it was with hydro and some power lines and stuff. So that was a pretty crazy feat that she accomplished.
It was.
It's very admirable.
Very unusual.
Right? Yeah. And so, knowing how rare it would be, it's unlikely that as an independent I would get elected. But that actually is also in itself a little superpower, because knowing that it's like you have nothing to lose, I guess my motivation for ever getting in politics anyway was to work on some problems and try and fix them, whether it was, mental health, addictions issues, drug policy, the public safety, bail reform, all this stuff. And I feel the same way now. I really have things I feel motivated to change. I want to work on those things. And now there's no limit to, my ability, for example, to reach across the floor to the premier and say,
Well,
hey,
your
let's...
limit is 3 years,
Well,
right?
yeah.
I mean,
But I mean, I'm not constrained
yeah.
by
No, you're
the
not, which is great.
politicking. Yeah.
And for what it's worth, I love independence because I've said this for years, that I believe political parties corrupt individual thoughts and voices. They stifle them, and they make it difficult for someone. I love talking to people like you. You're very rare.
Well, I love
Like a
talking to you. This
you're a
has been fun.
unicorn, right?
Well,
Because you do sit in this very unique seat. But let's fast forward to 3 years from now. You're going to have to make a decision. I guess first question would be, do you plan to run again at this point?
well, at this point, I want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would love to keep doing this job as long as I can, right? It's such a gift to be able to be an advocate for the community. And
Right.
I mean, it's pretty cool.
Would you ever join a political party again?
I would have to really weigh that out
Yeah.
because, I think that was an experience that I've had twice over. I was
Right.
I was
Yeah.
elected as a BC Liberal, then
Yeah.
I morphed into BC United.
Then BC Conservative and
And I joined
Independent.
the BC Conservatives, and now I'm independent. And I think,
All you have to do is join the NDP, and then you will have like,
yeah, they give you a special hat.
yeah,
It's probably a dunce cap if you do that. But anyway, I think that I'm really focused at this time really on, I'm kind of like I want to achieve things. Like I feel a lot of pride actually in the changes that we've made to drug policy in BC.
yeah,
The advocacy that I've done for my community, both when I was in Surrey South and in Cloverdale. And I just see so many challenges, whether it's the timely access to healthcare or our, education, K-12 education system, declining results in literacy and numeracy. I want to fix those things.
Yeah.
And if I spend all my time worrying about whether or not I'm going to get elected again, it really does take away from what I really came here for.
right,
I came here to kick ass.
yeah,
And so I want to focus on doing that. And it sounds like I'm being maybe a little flippant or whatever, but like honestly, the most joy that I get from this job is, whether it's someone coming to my constituency office and we help them with a provincial problem they have, or whether it's, something that I've said as a critic translated into real change.
right,
These things are like it's like skydiving or, the amount of joy and the rush that you get from that. If I can do in the next 3 years, even just a handful of things for British Columbians, I'm going to leave this job so proud and happy. I'm already proud of the work that I've done. And I just want to fight for that. I don't want to have to worry about fighting to get back in one party or the other.
Right.
I just want to, and if I do ultimately end up working with Conservatives again, that will be the case. If I, as an independent, and I did this even as a Conservative, calling up a minister and saying, let's meet. I see this problem. Here's also something I would like to offer as a solution. I'm going to keep doing it because, we need to get things done here.
So I agree with what you're saying. I love the passion that you have for making this province a better place. And I love the fact that you've got this independence to kind of, on one topic choose A and another topic choose B with really no political blowback, at least not right now, because you don't have a party that you're having to be accountable to.
Well, you're not whipped.
You're not whipped. But at the same time, just to be the devil's advocate, at the same time, if you take a long view, and that's why I was asking the question earlier about whether you would run for election again. If you take the long view, you're going to be a lot more effective in maybe moving along some of the issues that are important to you and you believe are important to British Columbians if you were aligned with a governing party or one that may become governing. So 2 questions for you. Why aren't you running for leadership of the BC Conservative Party? And then the following question is, why don't you go join the NDP?
Okay, well, the second part of your question is easier to answer. I'm not aligned with the NDP.
You're not.
Because
you seem very centrist. And,
well, I'm a centrist and I'm socially
and this
liberal.
the NDP government has been, by their very left-leaning critics, have been said this is a very centrist NDP.
it's become more centrist over time. But still, I think that
Too far away for you?
there's still things that we're not really aligned with. I think I'm more fiscally conservative there. We've seen how they've ballooned the public service and now they have to slash it, unfortunately, for people who are going to lose their jobs. I really think that we're going to see a lot of that. But so for me, I'm a person who's fiscally conservative. I believe in small government, but strong governance. Let's have
good.
really great policies, but, a small cost of the public service. And so I'm socially liberal, fiscally conservative, law and order conservative, drug policy conservative, all of that. So no, I'm more than willing to collaborate and work with ministers and be helpful where I can be. It's in the interest, I think, of my constituents to solve problems now. I'm not going to wait till some
Right.
3-year away campaign to give an idea that I think might help a
Good.
mother who needs healthcare
That's
now.
fair. Yeah.
And in terms of why am I not running for the Conservative Party leadership, well, there's lots of different reasons. First of all, I have young kids in my family. I want to spend a lot of time. It was a hard year for me.
Right.
It really was.
Yeah.
You guys all saw, you watch the news or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It was not always easy. I think being on the outside and not even being in caucus and then deciding to run would be like kind of a weird thing to do also. But, the other thing I think that we're seeing a little bit is that the party's trying to figure out who it is. I see a lot of arguments among some candidates about who is more socially conservative. I'm not sure it's a good fit for me. I certainly am not. I'm not socially conservative.
Right.
I'm kind of a live and let live kind of gal. And so I just, I didn't want to put myself in a situation where I'd be experiencing like a 4-month-long purity test. Again, I didn't come into politics because I'm particularly political, to be honest. And when I was a member of the RCMP, there's really a lot of rules against, as a public servant, being involved in politics. So I'd never even donated to a political party until I was in one, And so I guess I haven't really put a lot of importance in that side. Maybe that's a fault of mine. Maybe I, was very focused on accomplishing and doing certain things and not being even internal politics as careful or as political as I should have been. But I'm happy the way things are now. I feel like I've really grown into this role as an independent, and I guess we'll see what the future holds. I mean, if they, have to consider where they're going as a party. I don't actually at this point think they want me back.
I guess the beauty of your situation is, you don't need this job. It sounds to me you love what you're doing, but there's 3 years ahead of you. It's not like 6 months. So you've got time. You've got issues that are very important to you, so you can focus on those. And there is a leadership decision coming here in the next few months, and you can evaluate after that. And maybe it's a leader that you would be aligned with, and
maybe they won't ask them,
and they might want you,
or
they might be a leader who you're not aligned with, and they don't want you.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So I mean,
you've got time.
And if I don't go back to a political party, it's not the end of the world.
And you can still run as an independent and be the
I can. And you
the
said, "Oh, I don't
2020
need this job." No, I think that even this job is almost like it's not a job. I don't know. It's hard to explain. It's not.
You enjoy it.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And I think that if you're looking to get into politics or running, you better love this kind of work. It's 24/7.
Yeah.
It's every day. It's Christmas Day. It's your birthday. Yeah. It's all the time. But I don't really see it as even being a job. It's more like an opportunity that you have. And I'm going to enjoy this opportunity as long as possible. And while I have this opportunity, I'm going to try and turn it into something that benefits people. I'm really praying that I can find success. I've had success when I was fighting against drug policy, like safe supply and decriminalization, and bringing to the forefront the need for bail reform in BC.
Yeah.
Many different issues where we've seen real change. I think that we'll see change with property rights. I think that I'm going to continue also pushing and doing some advocacy around the extortions, but this is what it's about for me. So I'm trying not to get myself too anxious about the politics of it and just focus on my opportunity here.
Okay. Well said. there is a leadership race happening right now. There's a lot of names going in the hat for the BC
It's
Conservatives.
crazy. A
It's
lot of
kinda
names,
crazy.
right? Yeah.
Is there any one person amongst that list, or two or three, that you're like, oh, that would not be good?
I thought you were going to say who's like the one I'm going for.
That would be my next
Who's
question.
the worst one? That's kind of a...
No, just like,
Oh
is
my
there anybody?
gosh.
Is there anybody you're like, oh, this would not be good?
Well,
John would, of course, John Rustad. He's not running for it, I guess, right? So he's.
I don't know. I saw something on Twitter or whatever that he was thinking about it.
Oh, okay. I'm sure if he was, he'd be in the top of your list, I imagine.
I would just wonder why he
Why?
made that decision. I mean,
Yeah.
he's very passionate about BC, obviously. Maybe that's his reason why. But look, I guess being that I'm socially liberal,
Yeah.
I obviously, when I see the battles for who can be the most socially conservative, and,
Right.
that's not well aligned with my values or who I am.
Yeah.
And even when John recruited me to the party, I was not told I would have to change and suddenly give up my values or who I was as a person. And, was at the time at least led to believe that we were going to be that coalition of center right
Yeah.
and work together on those sort of core issues and not necessarily spend a lot of time on social issues.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, seeing a debate that goes more towards who can be the most socially conservative isn't a good alignment for me. And so I probably wouldn't be supportive of a candidate that...
You're not going to name anybody.
Oh, no. Could you
No.
imagine?
Okay, let me give you the reverse question. Is there anybody in particular you hope would that's announced they're running for leadership that you think, wow, if they got in, I might be open to coming back if they're willing to think about me?
You know what? I'm going to probably give you a frustrating answer, because I honestly, even the ones that are more socially conservative, I see a little value added piece. And if I could take a little piece of each of these candidates and
Yeah.
make this like ultra leader,
Yeah.
I see cool things about every person.
So jury's out for you as far as there hasn't been a single standout person yet that if you were...
Well, I'll tell you my sort of three people where I am excited by what I see.
Okay.
Okay. So like, for example, when I look at what's happening with Ian Black, I was like, well, at least I don't know him personally.
Yeah.
I've met him a couple of times, but I don't know him well.
Okay.
But what I liked about his videos, for example, and the way he talks about DRIPA and, what he wants to do for the province, I was like, okay, he's very self-assured. He has a calmness about him that I like. And he has a confidence in when he's talking about his policy. Caroline Elliott, I also think is very dynamic. I actually know her from my previous political affiliations. And I think that she has a lot of potential to win over a young audience, women. I think that, just hearing a different perspective from her point of view is also exciting. Peter Millibar, I worked with in BC Liberals, but also in Conservatives. He's one of the best debaters. He knows the finances. Like, this guy gets the provincial budget and bam, he's like, he's great. So if you were looking for a fiscal guy, he's really great.
He's on it.
He's on it. So Daryl Jones, I think that's very interesting too. Here's a guy that's sort of come up from not the political world. I like that he has a focus on family. I like that he has a focus sort of on the pocketbook economics of, people. Sheldon Clare, for example, worked with him, BC Conservatives. He's a very grassroots-oriented person. Bruce Banman has experience as a mayor. Carrie Lynn Finley, of course, was the whip for Pierre Poilievre. She's got tons of experience. So, I mean, if you look at Steve Cooner, a big part of the Conservative caucus, and did a good job going up against Attorney General and Deputy Premier Nikki Sharma. So I think if you look at all the people, and I probably haven't named them all because there's one coming up every day, but there's many, interesting kind of aspects there that, to be honest, I can't wait to see them debate.
Yeah.
I'm interested. Yuri Fulmer, a very successful businessman in British Columbia. I think he's also associated to the United Way of Canada. He's a very kind person. I met him a couple times. Seems very, for a very successful person, very well grounded. And so, I mean, look, so far I see a lot of positive in each of these. But again, like I said, my own personal thing is that, like, being socially liberal myself, if the party intends to shun the socially liberal side, that wouldn't be a good alignment for me.
Yeah. Okay. Do you ever see BC United / BC Liberals reviving at all? Because there is this internal debate, as you're kind of alluding to, within the BC Conservatives of, like, who are the BC Liberals amongst us?
Well, there is another party, Centre BC. But so
is
you
there?
got to get Corinne Kirkpatrick to come on here, and then she'll tell you all about it.
Is she
Yeah,
doing that?
Yeah, Corinne
Okay.
was
So
my
Corinne's
colleague.
been on my show twice.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
so it's her
yeah.
party.
Okay.
And lovely woman, honestly, and has a wonderful daughter. Anyway, so she is in the center.
Okay.
It's a challenge, and here's the risk of having the other party is that we don't want to be in a situation, of course, of vote splitting. That was
Right.
a problem before. And one of the big concerns with when BC United ultimately ended its campaign and Conservatives carried on, and some members had joined to make that sort of coalition, if you will.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of people in British Columbia would consider themselves liberals.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't call themselves liberals in the sense of joining the Liberal Party.
Yeah.
Maybe they even vote conservative, but in terms of what they would identify with would be more of that, socially liberal, fiscally conservative balance.
Right.
And I think that we need to make sure whatever way the party goes, or that we have this place where people feel at home no matter who they are.
Right.
And that's the challenge.
It is a challenge.
Right. And, is that
Especially
because
when your brand is actually conservative. Like when your name is actually BC Conservative. I was thinking about this morning when I was driving in because I knew I was going to be meeting with you. And I thought, well, if I'm a more liberal-leaning voter and I have a choice basically between BC NDP and BC Conservatives, and they say don't judge a book by its cover, but most people do. Most people aren't as politically engaged as you and I are. And I just look at that on the ballot sheet. I'm going to probably lean towards NDP. And it makes me wonder, like, regardless of who they choose as a leader, maybe the leader is really important. But if there's no revival of the brand BC United or BC Liberal, and your choice as a voter is simply BC Conservatives or BC NDP, and you're kind of centrist voter,
what do you do?
what do you maybe
Independent votes, baby.
or move it to Surrey Cloverdale and vote
Yeah,
for
move to
Elenore.
Cloverdale, please. I think this is the challenge, and this is the caramel secret. The person is going to have to find a way to make sure that those center votes, that those people who maybe to some extent feel politically homeless in a very conservative, especially in a socially conservative party, where are they going to park their vote? I don't think you can rely on people just being so mad at the NDP that they stop caring about reproductive rights.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or that,
well said.
you name whatever the social issue would be that would be controversial. A lot of people aren't willing to think that way.
Yeah.
And you're right. People don't. A lot of them aren't politically engaged until like a couple days before voting, and whatever commercial they saw between Hockey Night in Canada and whatever, or on Global, that's maybe how they pick. Which is why it's important to have podcasts like this, right? It's important to engage people and have a conversation, and so they get interested and excited.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the heart of the challenge, right? Is how do you capture that? How do you capture that sort of middle pack?
Yeah.
And are they going to be mad enough at David Eby and the economy in 3 years from now, or whenever he calls the election, is going to be bad enough, or they don't have a family doctor long enough that they just vote for this, or or is it going to be people so mad at the Conservatives, that they're, even though they don't like the NDP, they're just going to, like, this is the.
I think there'll be a lot of people in that situation. We'll see.
And a lot can happen.
Yeah,
like right now things are pretty grim. I'm not going to lie. I'm not sure that they have enough money even to print copies of the budget at this point.
Right.
Just kidding. I'm sure they do.
No,
but we're not in a good
Let's keep
situation
boring,
here.
yeah.
These, property rights and the uncertainty, obviously, the tariffs. There's all kinds of financial
Yeah.
pressures on us right now. It's so I think that if the election was called tomorrow, I think that David Eby would be in trouble.
Yeah.
But I have no crystal ball.
Yeah.
I don't know what the world will look like in 2 years potentially from now or even next year.
Yeah.
And so we'll have to wait and see, what will this legislation look like? What kind of certainty will we bring to British Columbians with our debates on property rights and interpretation of laws?
Yeah. And fixing this extortion issue as well.
Fixing extortion and the plethora of other issues that we have to deal with in the province right now.
Well, Elenore, thank you for all the work you do every day. And I love talking to independent MLAs because I think you might be my first and only one I've ever had on the show.
I'm your favorite one.
Exactly, my favorite one. Elenore Sturko, independent MLA for Surrey Cloverdale. Thank you for being on Coastal Front today. Best of luck over the next 3 years and whatever you wish to do in the future, whether you rerun or not. Best of luck, and thank you for being on our show today.
Thank you for having me.